Hello and welcome to the National Charter Schools Conference. We are virtual again this year, and while I wish we could all be together, I'm grateful that the end of the pandemic looks near. Our schools are reopening, more than 150 million Americans have been vaccinated, and many aspects of normal life are returning. Like all of you, I'm hoping that when we meet next year, it will be in person. I am eager to move forward, and I'm grateful that our movement is stronger than ever. In community after community, parents have chosen charter schools in record numbers. Why? Because we rose to the occasion. We put our students first, prioritizing their academic, mental health, nutritional, and other needs. Charter schools modeled how remote learning could be done well, thanks to the extraordinary dedication of teachers and leaders who adapted on the fly and found new ways to engage students of all ages and abilities. Take Arizona Autism, for example. Although many families across the country struggled to find support for their students with disabilities, Arizona Autism showed that a pandemic would not stop them from educating and caring for their students, even if the building was closed. And when it was safe to do so, many charter schools led the way in reopening buildings, helping students and families experience something like normal life in a very abnormal time. Not every parent felt the same way about sending their children back to the classroom, but they knew that their views would be heard and respected at their charter school. One City Schools in Madison, Wisconsin, surveyed their families and decided to reopen late August, one of the first in the nation because that's what families asked for. That responsiveness to students and families is one of the reasons interest and enrollment in charter schools has skyrocketed this year. Parents knew what was happening in their communities. They chose schools that were flexible and responsive. They tuned into serious discussions about how to reopen schools safely and tuned out of the usual political food fights that dominated the conversation in other sectors. Now, as life and schooling begin to return to normal, the big question is, how are we going to keep the trust of new and returning charter school families and build on the lessons learned over the past year? Every single poll of parents shows that they don't want to go back to how things were. Murmuration found that only 28% of parent voters with school-aged children report high levels of satisfaction with their children's schools. By contrast, satisfaction was largely constant at about 50% before the pandemic. Public opinion expert Frank Luntz also found that 66% of U.S. parents agree schools should be focused on rethinking how we educate students after the pandemic. So, where do we go from here? The past year has helped to sharpen our focus on what matters most. The total well-being of our students and their families matters. That includes mental health and social-emotional supports. Many of you who work with traumatized students know this very well. That's why several sessions at this year's conference are focused on responding to the social and emotional needs of our students, and we're thrilled to have Priscilla Chan, a physician, educator, and mom, tell us more about this important topic. Equity also matters. While we've always known inequalities exist in America, the past year made them even more prominent. Many of our students have parents who are essential workers, and they had to keep going to work every day in healthcare settings and retail outlets and warehouses at great personal risk. Many of these same families lacked the technology needed to stay connected to school and learn virtually. And while some affluent parents were able to hire instructors to work with their children in learning pods, that simply wasn't an option for many of the families we serve. And of course, racial equity remained a significant part of our national dialogue. Many charter schools are located in communities impacted by racial injustices. A charter school student, Darnella Frazier, bravely captured video on her cell phone of George Floyd's death while in police custody. That video sparked an international reckoning with racial inequality and it's why we were honored to recognize her as one of our 30 under 30 change makers this year. There was so much tragedy and loss in 2020. Whether the last year will be a lost year for education remains to be seen. But we do know that we have a lot of work ahead of us to make up for the inequities that the pandemic made worse, and academic recovery will be featured throughout this year's conference programming. Fortunately, the federal government has responded to the pandemic's effect on schools in a big way. The last round of relief funding, passed in March, includes more than $122 billion to help schools recover and move forward from the pandemic. That's roughly $7 billion for charter schools. Charter schools that are local education agencies will receive funding the same way other school districts do. We also hope that charter schools that are authorized by traditional school districts and rely upon them for their share of federal funding will be treated fairly by their districts. We think school districts will act in good faith, but we will be working closely with our state partners to respond to any efforts to deny charter schools the funding that is rightfully theirs as public schools and was provided to serve the students in their buildings. With so much money flowing to schools, a crucial consideration will be how we use these funds. The funding is very flexible and can be used in a variety of ways, from addressing learning loss to providing mental health services to purchasing PPE and software. I'm sure every single person watching right now has said, that would be so cool to do for our students, but we just don't have the money. Or, we could really make a difference for our kids if we did this, but I don't know how we'll pay for it. Well, now there's a good chance you'll be able to pay for it, and I hope we can show our colleagues throughout education, as well as parents and political leaders, that charter schools can use dollars creatively and ambitiously to reduce inequality and take learning to new heights. The more we demonstrate that freedom and flexibility combined with accountability to parents and authorizers is a winning formula, the more we will help the education community and the wider public understand what we're all about. Just as we've been an example of how to respond to families and students throughout the pandemic, we can be an example of how to put students first as we emerge from the pandemic. If we see schools that aren't living up to that standard, we need to get them sorted out. A few bad apples can set us back and distract us from our mission. So authorizers and state organizations need to be vigilant about keeping quality and accountability high as more parents choose charter schools. States such as California, Colorado, and Florida saw big enrollment increases in charter schools during the past year. We believe this is part of a national trend that shows parents want more, not less, public school choice. This is a great time for individual schools, networks, and state support organizations to build relationships with your states and communities and expand your advocacy armies. Families have shown that they're willing to vote with their feet. The most effective allies are the ones who will go to bat for us in the city hall, at school boards, in state houses, and in Congress. We know we'll have political fights on our hands in the months and years to come. We must keep motivating our friends and engaging new supporters as we lift up communities all over America. Work in our local communities is so important because we are, at our core, a local movement. 30 years ago, Minnesota passed the first charter school law. Since then, we've expanded to 44 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the mighty territory of Guam. One of the hallmarks of our movement is that we learn from the evidence in front of us and make changes based on what works and what doesn't. This year, at the state level, we saw more progress in support of charter schools than we've seen in several years. Florida, Iowa, West Virginia, and Wyoming improved their charter laws by creating new authorizers. Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Nevada, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas made improvements on the funding equity front. And other states, such as California, Colorado, and Maine, successfully defended their sectors against encroachment by officials who wanted to limit public school choices, just as parents were asking for more. Of course, we've seen a lot of change at the federal level, too. We're working with a new administration and a new Congress. And as a mom with a daughter, I am inspired by the election of the first female, Black, and Indian American Vice President of the United States. And I know you were too. We're also happy to be working with Miguel Cardona, a Latino Secretary of Education, who's a former charter school authorizer and English learner and embodies what's great about our country. We're honored to have Secretary Cardona offer a keynote at this conference and look forward to hearing more about his vision for serving all students well and focusing on unity and equity in public education, two values the charter school sector holds at our core. So far, some of the administration's early moves have been promising, and others have been less reassuring. The pandemic relief funding will go a long way to helping schools, and President Biden's plans on physical and social infrastructure can benefit many of our schools and families. However, the administration has not yet clearly articulated its vision for charter schools. Still, we remain hopeful because there is tremendous demand for charter schools. I believe we're experiencing a real moment of opportunity. We're stronger as a sector, and our country is more united around the need to give parents and students more choices in public education. We've learned that we can be far more innovative, far more quickly than we ever thought possible. We've proven that our teachers are adaptive and creative, and that our students are resilient. We've demonstrated to parents and policymakers that charter schools can lead public education when other schools are slow to act. We've shown that we're essential community partners, helping families access everything from technology to meals to vaccines. For 30 years, charter schools have been redefining what public education can be. But this is the first time many people are taking notice. We need to seize this moment to elevate our work and expand our reach so every family can have access to a great public school. This conference is about helping you raise your game, from the classroom to the community. We are deeply appreciative of all you do and have done. And I'm excited about what we will do together in the future. Thank you to all of our conference sponsors, to our presenters, to our keynote speakers, to the awesome National Alliance team, and in particular our conference team, and to all of you for joining us.